Alrighty then. Hello, welcome back to Simon's Rants. I'm Simon, and today I'm ranking every Jim Carrey movie ever. In case you don't know why I'm doing this video, it's because Jim Carrey may or may not actually be retired now. He said so in an interview that he was doing for Sonic the Hedgehog 2, so if that was in fact the last time we're going to see him on the big screen, I wanted to honor his career by talking about it. Jim Carrey's my favorite actor of all time, and he's done a bunch of really good movies, so I want to go through all of them and rank them from worst to best. Now, I don't want to include every single movie he's ever been in on this list. It doesn't really make sense to include movies like Anchorman 2 or Kick-Ass 2 even, where he's just playing a small role in a bigger movie that wasn't really about his character. So I'm only including the movies that he starred in, was the bad guy in, or played a significant role in. Also, these are only going to be the full-length feature films that he was in, which may or may not have been released in theaters, but will not include smaller movies that are under an hour and do not qualify. So, sorry to introducing Janet, aka Rubberface, but we're not including that one because it's really, really bad and would be lowest on this list if it was included anyway. So, there you go. If you're wondering where it was, it's the worst one he's ever been in. But I think that's enough for me. Let's just get on with this list and look at every Jim Carrey movie ranked. Number 30, Dumb and Dumber 2. Now, this is hard to say, but this movie just wasn't funny. And that's coming from somebody who's a huge fan of the first Dumb and Dumber movie. I think that movie is fantastic. I think it's one of the best comedies ever made. I thought Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels were both equally amazing in the first one. But they took a full 20 years to come back and make the sequel, and it just doesn't work. 20 years later, you're a completely different person. It's going to be impossible to come back and embody the same character in the same way that you did before. It's just going to come across as a cheap imitation, and that's what this movie was. It's not funny, it's really just lame, and both Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels looked like they were imitating or doing caricatures of themselves rather than just being themselves. So yeah, Dumb and Dumber 2 is really just the worst Jim Carrey movie I've ever seen. Frankly, I enjoyed the prequel that came out in 2000 whatever more than this. That's how bad this is. Number 29, Earth Girls Are Easy. Ooh. This movie doesn't really have an excuse to be this bad. It just is, and you've probably never heard of it, so here it is. Earth Girls Are Easy is a musical comedy about hairy aliens coming down and landing in the swimming pool of somebody in, I think it was LA or Hollywood or something, and just being weird. The best thing to come out of this movie was that it introduced Jim Carrey to the Wayans brothers, which ended up getting him on In Living Color. But the movie itself is so freaking bad. You would think that three aliens being played by a Wayans brother, Jim Carrey, and Jeff Goldblum would be hilarious, but somehow it's just not at all in any way, shape, or form. It's just awkward, it's weird, it's cringy, and the music's bad, and there's just... No, this movie's really bad. Number 28, Sonic the Hedgehog. This movie... In my opinion, they should have just gone with the original Sonic design, because then we would have gotten into the category of so bad it's good, where every scene we would have been assaulted by this horrifying imagery that was resting right in the dead center middle of the uncanny valley. It was just terrifying to look at, and I wish we had done that, but instead we got some better looking CGI, but an awful all-around movie. It's not funny. Jim Carrey is trying harder than everybody else is. It's got really bad writing filled with plot holes and just stupid stuff. It really was a waste of Jim Carrey's time, but hey, at least his grandson was entertained by it.
Meow?
Number 27. Mr. Popper's Penguins. This was the first time I remember going to a Jim Carrey movie and being like, yeah, I don't really want to see this. This doesn't look good. It was really when I felt like his career just tanked. There's always a point in time in every comedian's career, especially the group from the 90s, it seems like, where they stop doing these raunchy comedies and start doing kid-friendly family films. And it's usually either because they start having kids or they start having grandkids or whatever. They're just thinking about making kid-centric movies, and that's usually when these careers by these comedians start tanking. Nothing about this movie's funny. It's a terrible concept, just executed even worse. I don't know, there's not much to say about it because there's nothing really remarkable about it anyway. It's like they just told Jim Carrey, hey, go be funny. We're not gonna give you a script or anything, just start being funny. You're penguins, hey, animals, you were in Ace Ventura, you were around animals before. That's successful, right? Sure, okay, yeah, we don't need to write a script. Number 26. Dark Crimes. It really is a shame to me that this movie wasn't good because, like, obviously, I enjoy Jim Carrey as an actor. Martin Sokas is also a very good actor, and both of them had amazing chemistry in this dark, depressing thriller movie. And there was elements of this movie that were really good, but ultimately, every time they weren't on screen together, especially, the movie just dragged. It felt extremely low budget. It felt like there wasn't any real talent being put into it other than these two actors. And yeah, I just didn't enjoy it as a whole. Like, it's dark, it's depressing. I like those kind of movies, but when nothing really comes of it and there's no real reason to keep watching, having a dark and depressing story just makes the whole experience worse. Like I said, when Jim Carrey and Martin Sokas were on screen together, they were great. They had great chemistry. There was this eerie vibe that they both had and pulled off perfectly, but everything else was bad. It was really bad. Number 25, Sonic the Hedgehog 2. This movie was definitely an improvement on the first one, but not because they made it any better, it's because they took themselves less seriously, so you didn't mind the plot holes and the stupidity as much. Much like in the first one, Jim Carrey was obviously trying harder than everybody else. Nobody else seemed to want to be there, although Idris Elba was actually pretty good as Knuckles. Nobody else seemed to care at all, so Jim Carrey showed up, honestly seeming to care a little bit less than the first one. He put less context and less work into the development of the character of Dr. Robotnik in this, but it matched the vibe better. So everybody was treating the movie like it didn't matter, like it was a silly cartoon. And so, therefore, if the movie doesn't care that it's being stupid and not trying to ask us to take it seriously, then I can enjoy it a little bit more and not worry about how stupid it is. But yeah, it was pretty stupid. Nothing about the movie was really good at all except Knuckles and Jim Carrey. Yeah, it's a stupid kids movie. It was very, very stupid. Number 24. Batman Forever. Yeah, this movie's hard for me because it's a mixed bag. It's the beginning of the end for Batman, at least in the 90s, where you had the great Tim Burton films where you had Batman and Batman Returns that were dark and creepy and a little bit depressing and a little bit just weird, and for some reason that just wasn't really what Warner Brothers wanted anymore. There weren't enough toy sales and McDonald's was going to sever their ties, and so they brought in Joel Schumacher to make a much lighter, happier, goofier version of Batman, and that of course eventually led to the worst Batman movie ever in Batman and Robin. But first came Batman Forever, which had some really interesting ideas to it. I thought Jim Carrey was hilarious in this movie. I also enjoyed Tommy Lee Jones' crazy version of Two-Face. Chris O'Donnell is a great Robin. Val Kilmer is actually surprisingly okay as Batman, except for when he smiles. We'll just cut that part out, please. Overall, it was fun, but stupid and silly. So, not a bad superhero movie. It ended up being a lot like what we'd later get from the MCU, where the movies don't really have a lot of logic to them, but they're entertaining and they're flashy and they've got fun color schemes and stuff. So, yeah, I don't have much against it, but it really does represent a really dark time that was upcoming in DC Comics movies, which, yeah, the worst part about this movie is that it reminds me of what was to come next, so I do hold a little bit against this because of Batman and Robin, but yeah, this movie is fun in its own way, even if there are bad nipples. Freaking Joel, man. Number 23. The number 23. Yeah, I couldn't resist putting this at number 23. You could argue that Batman Forever is a little bit better than this, but they're both Joel Schumacher films are about the same. They both have good ideas and poor execution because the director is just weird. I really do love the concept of the number 23, having a dark, sinister thriller that's like psychological and mind-bending, and you're confused by this mystery and you don't know where it's going, but ultimately the twist at the end was such a letdown that it kind of made all the good moments of this film feel pointless. And so even though I enjoyed seeing Jim Carrey take on a darker role, which at the time wasn't something he did very often, he had done dramas before. I mean, all of his biggest dramas came out before this, but until Dark Crimes, you could argue that this was the darkest role he ever did. That being said, it is a 6.5 on IMDb for a reason. It's pretty much just right down the middle, run-of-the-mill movie. It's not that good, it's not that bad, it's got some interesting ideas, some poor execution, and ultimately is just kind of forgettable, unfortunately. Number 22, Once Bitten. This is the film that I consider Jim Carrey's first starring role. Like I said, he was in Introducing Janet / Rubberface before this. He was in a couple other random weird things, but this is the first actual movie that he was in, and it's not very well known. It's not very high quality, but I think that it's actually underrated. It's not like I consider it a great movie or anything either, but I just don't understand what makes it so much worse than every other 1980s horror comedy. Like, what separates this from every Michael J. Fox movie he was doing at the time, other than Back to the Future? It's cheesy, it's stupid, the jokes are really lame sometimes, and there's a dance song number thing for absolutely no reason. But hey, you've got a young Jim Carrey finding himself on the big screen for the first time. It's got actually a really good cast with Cleavon Little playing Sebastian, which is one of the vampires, Lauren Hutton as the lead vampiress, and Karen Copens does a great job playing the love interest. I all around enjoy this movie. Yes, it's dumb, it's stupid, it's silly, it's very strange, not all of the jokes land, it's low budget, low quality, but that's kind of part of the appeal of all of these 1980s teen comedies. That's what they all were. What separated this from the other ones? I guess it was just star power, honestly. Michael J. Fox blew up in the 80s, Jim Carrey didn't until about a decade later, so this movie didn't get that fame that the High School Werewolf movie did, whatever that was called. Number 21, The Incredible Burt Wonderstone. This is another example of a movie where just Jim Carrey is the only good thing about it. The plot of the movie ultimately revolves primarily around Steve Carell, Steve Buscemi, and Olivia Wilde's characters, who are sometimes funny, sometimes charming, but ultimately pretty forgettable, whereas Jim Carrey, who plays the foil of this story, is so hilarious in every scene that he's in that you just wish he was in more of it. Now, I get he didn't want to overstay his welcome, and there's a chance that he could have with this type of character. If he was in the movie more, we may have started to get tired of it or bored of it, but regardless, every time he's not on the screen, you wish he was. Every time we're centered on something else, you wish that Jim Carrey was there to save the scene and make it funnier. There are some scenes that are still funny without Jim Carrey in it, but none of the scenes without him are as funny as the ones with him. It's poorly written, it's poorly directed, it looks cheap, it looks just gross. It's one of those movies that's like, it looks overly digital, like they oversaturated it or something. I don't know, there's a lot to dislike about it, but Jim Carrey delivers one of his best performances since the 90s in this movie.
The world record for staring was 24 hours, but I've been doing it for over 3 days now, and frankly, I'm bored. So I'm gonna spice things up with a little pepper spray. Bring it!
Number 20. I Love You, Philip Morris. In this film, Jim Carrey plays Stephen Russell, a cop-turned-con man who goes to jail and then falls in love with Philip Morris, played by Ewan McGregor. I think both characters are expertly portrayed by both actors. I think it's some of the best acting I've seen from both actors. But the movie itself is a bit tonally confused, which just leaves me a little bit disappointed every time I see the film. The story could have been absolutely amazing. The real life story it's based on is, you've got this man whose entire life gets flipped on its head one day suddenly, where he realizes his sexuality, he turns from a cop into a con man, he gets sent to jail and escapes and fakes his death and all of these amazing, interesting things. And then, of course, you can focus on the romance angle as well, which they did a lot, but it just feels goofy, which is kind of disappointing. This movie could have been very serious. This movie could have been a grand story, but ultimately it just wastes, I feel, too much time being quirky and being weird and being strange, which I do enjoy the comedy of this movie. I think most of it's pretty good, and like I said, the cast is great. You've got Jim Carrey, you've got Ewan McGregor, you've also got Leslie Mann, who's a great comedic actress, but ultimately this movie just didn't feel like it knew what it wanted to be. So it had some great moments, but altogether, the movie's just, I think, to me, okay. Maybe even good, but certainly not great like it could have been. The story itself is great. It makes for a great, amazing, grand story, but was just this little quirky rom-com type movie, which I don't know why they went with that angle. Definitely not bad, I enjoyed it a lot, but it could have been a lot more than it was. Number 19. How the Grinch Stole Christmas. I am a sucker for this movie. I'll be one of the first people to admit it's not perfect, and in fact, I think the original short cartoon was a million times better, but I just really enjoy Jim Carrey as the Grinch. There's a million problems with this movie, including the flashbacks. I hate Little Grinch. So unnecessary, so weird, so uncomfortable. I think tonally this movie was very mean-spirited when it shouldn't have been. They turned the Who's from nice, happy people celebrating Christmas into these evil capitalist slaves for some reason. They also just made it uncomfortable with weird, awkward sexual innuendo and just very mean-spirited jokes as a whole. So ultimately, I enjoy this movie in spite of itself, because Jim Carrey is just so freaking good as a Grinch. He was a perfect casting. I think he did amazing as a Grinch. It's one of the best roles of his career, honestly, which is kind of a weird best role to have, but regardless, it's great. The rest of the movie around it, though, as beautiful as it looks at times, the sets are amazing, the costumes are awesome, but the movie itself just feels so dirty. It feels so gritty. It feels so mean-spirited. Like, it's just a weird choice to take such a happy and hopeful story that Dr. Seuss created and turn it into something so mean. So yeah, I think Jim Carrey's amazing, which is why this movie isn't ranked lower, but ultimately, the movie is good because of him and only him. Everything else about the movie is kind of a detractor for me, especially Baby Grinch. Can't stand Baby Grinch.
Yes, this Christmas music. It's joyful and triumphant.
Number 18. A Christmas Carol. A Christmas Carol to me is one of, if not the greatest Christmas stories of all time. I absolutely adore that story, and this is an okay adaptation of that story. There's certainly been a lot better versions. If you're curious about my rankings, you can go check out that list. It's a bit older, I'm in an ugly set, but hey, it's still me. To me, it ultimately comes down again to a little bit of tonal confusion, where this movie didn't quite know what it wanted to be. You've got these great emotional tear-jerking moments, you've got these grand big spectacle moments, you've got moments of genuine fear and horror, and then you've got mixed in there some genuinely bad comedy that doesn't quite fit, and really bad motion capture style animation. I hate this style of animation because it's such a weird uncanny valley thing where they're motion capturing people so they look and they move naturally, but then they'll still do animation style things. Like, you've got the part where Fezziwig jumps up in the air and he's levitating for like 5 minutes, and then the running and the chasing scene is so overblown and overdramatic yet silly looking, and then you've got these stupid comedy moments where like Marley's lower lip gets like dragged up over his nose, and it's like, what are we doing, man? It's such like an amazing, awesome, powerful story, and at times this adaptation is, but they really seem to miss the mark at other times. Gary Oldman's also in this movie, and he's fantastic. I think that his Bob Cratchit is really good, although once again, there's some weird animation thing here, like all of his daughters are taller than him. Like, if you're gonna make him a really short guy, okay, I'm fine with that choice, but why did we choose to make all of his daughters 6'4"? I don't get it, it's weird. You've got powerful emotional moments like him with tears in his eyes looking straight through Scrooge, and that's like a powerful emotional moment, and those moments are well done. And Jim Carrey's great as Scrooge, by the way. I love his delivery of certain lines. It's like he's doing an homage to Alastair Sim. He's not doing an impression of him, but he's heavily inspired by him, you can tell, and I love the delivery style. I love how he says some of these really iconic lines, and the Happy New Year, like, I enjoy that. So once again, I feel like Jim Carrey's really good, and there are other elements in here that are really good too. It's not like the French where he's fighting by himself here. It's just, to me, like, they missed the mark here, because they're telling one of the greatest stories ever told, which therefore could be one of the greatest movies ever made, and it came out to being a pretty good movie. I enjoy Jim Carrey. I enjoy Gary Oldman. I enjoy some of the visuals of this movie. I enjoy a lot of this movie, actually, but overall, it just felt a little bit pointless, and it felt disappointing.
I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, I am about to raise your salary. Merry Christmas to you, Bob.
Number 17, Me, Myself, and Irene. Me, Myself, and Irene is what I would consider to be the first, like, good movie on this list. We're starting to get into the really good movies, in my opinion, here. Not to say that this is a perfect movie. There's still some issues with this movie, but I love this movie. I think there is an argument that could be made here that this movie too often relies on gross out humor and shock value comedy, but I think it's really well written comedy. I think it's really funny. I also think that Jim Carrey, who is debatably the best physical comedy actor of all time, and if not certainly the best of his generation, delivered one of the best physical comedy performances of his career in this film. The dueling duality of these two personalities fighting within one body was expertly done and to hilarious results within Jim Carrey's performance. The movie as a whole is hilarious, but that one scene in particular where Jim Carrey fights against himself physically is a masterclass on physical comedy acting. It is absolutely brilliant. I think for my own personal tastes, it is just a little bit too crude and goes a little too far at some places, but overall, I just think it's a really funny movie.
Well, old girl, your suffering's over.
Oh, it ain't always easy doing Mother Nature's work.
Oh, gee. Oh. Do you believe that?
No, it's...
Oh, my God in heaven! What the hell is wrong with you? Die! Let go! Let go, girl! On the greener pastures, come on! Clear cutting a place in heaven for you!
Number 16, Ace Ventura, When Nature Calls. This is a hard movie to rate, at least for me. When I've talked to other people about my opinions on the two Ace Ventura films, I always say that I like the first one better. I think it's a better movie, but I will also always admit that I think the second one is funnier. I think both the best and worst thing about this movie is that it suffers from an acute case of sequel-itis, which, in case you don't know what that is, it's when in a sequel to a movie, they dumb everything down a little bit. Oftentimes, in comedies especially, when there's a sequel, they make the character more of a one-note character. If he was a little bit goofy or a little bit ridiculous, that's all he is now. He's just full-on ridiculous. Also, all of the side characters are ridiculous too. The main appeal of Ace Ventura: Pet Detective was that Ace Ventura was a wild, manic, crazy character in a world full of normal people, so he stuck out like a sore thumb. He was wild, he was crazy, and therefore hilarious, especially when put in contrast with normal cops or people. In Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls, everybody else is crazy and strange too, so it loses a bit of an impact when he's wild and crazy because everybody's a little bit wild and crazy. So when people take a step back to look at him, oh, he's crazy, it's like, yeah, but kind of everybody in this universe is now. That leads to more jokes per minute. That usually means that the movie is going to be funnier, but it makes the movie as a whole feel a little bit lower quality. Also, the plot takes a back seat, which you can argue, what's the point of a plot in an Ace Ventura movie? And I understand that point, but ultimately, I felt like the first movie was genuinely well written, funny, and a good movie. The second one is just funny. And that's fine, it's a comedy, so being funny is the most important thing, but everything else didn't matter as much, and you could tell. Still, it is very funny. It's an absolutely hilarious movie, and that's why it's ranked as high as it is, but yeah, to me, this was like middle school Simon loved this movie, adult Simon enjoys this movie. There's a little bit of a difference there.
Who is this ghastly man?
Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. And you must be the Monopoly guy. Hey, thanks for the free parking.
Number 15, doing time on Maple Drive. Honestly, you could make the argument that this movie doesn't meet the criteria that I set up for being on this list, because Jim Carrey isn't the main character, and he's not an antagonist either. He's very much in a supporting role here, but this movie is just fantastic, and not a lot of people know about it, and they should. This was a TV movie in 1992, so Jim Carrey was on In Living Color at the time, but didn't get the fame yet that came along with Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber in 1994. In this movie, Jim Carrey plays the older alcoholic brother of the main character, who is secretly closeted to avoid the wrath of his family. They're a well-to-do family with a lot of pride and a lot of secrets, and so there's a lot of turmoil right beneath the surface here. All three kids are struggling against their parents, who cannot seem to understand their basic needs and struggles. It is, in every meaning of the word, a melodrama. It's a very dramatic movie. It's all just about the relationships of these characters in their everyday lives, and it's honestly fantastic. Like I said, not a lot of people know about this movie, but the people who do know about it absolutely love it because it's great. I think it was fantastic. I think it was way ahead of its time. I thought the acting was great. Not even just Jim Carrey. I thought he was really good in his limited role, and I think you can tell that he's going to be a star based on that performance. But I mean, James Sicking, who played the father, I thought he was fantastic. Bibi Besh, she plays the mother. She's also equally great. The whole cast, though, the whole cast is all really good. It really is just an undiscovered gem. Most people don't know about it, and a lot more people should. Number 14, Fun with Dick and Jane. How do you review a good comedy? It's funny. It is funny. And frankly, I would say that this was Jim Carrey's second to last great comedy. He had the bulk of his amazing comedies in the 90s, and then began that transition into more serious work in the late 90s, like The Truman Show, and then early in the 2000s, he still had a couple of comedies, but he started doing more dramas, more family films, and he didn't really ever have nearly the success in comedy ever again. But Fun with Dick and Jane was the rare exception to that in the 2000s, where he actually looked and was as funny as he was in the 90s. This movie is absolutely hilarious. It's filled with amazing ad-libs. If you watch the bloopers, you really see how much of it was just come up with on the spot. It's hilarious. The bloopers are too. Definitely watch the bloopers. The bloopers may actually be even funnier than the movie is. It's a great cast. Jim Carrey, Tay Leone, Alec Baldwin, they're all fantastic in this movie. Alec Baldwin is really unlikable, which is the point. And like I said, it is just one of Jim Carrey's funniest movies, and one of the last times he was ever close to being this funny.
Okay, but I'm warning you. If you tell anyone what you've seen here today, I'll come back. And
Oh my god, my glasses are steaming.
Number 13, Horton Hears a Who. Yeah, this might be a little bit of an unpopular opinion, I'm aware of that, but this is easily, to me, the best Dr. Seuss adaptation, full-length movie we've ever gotten, and it's not particularly close. I think that is hilarious. I think Jim Carrey's amazing in this. I think Steve Carell's amazing in this. I think that the plot does a great job of expanding the short story out into a feature length, which is where all Dr. Seuss movies struggle, especially movies like The Lorax or Cat in the Hat, two of the worst ones. But even in The Grinch, like I was saying, they struggle to stretch it out and make a good plot out of that extra runtime where you're adding in this weird stuff with Baby Grinch and whatever. This didn't have anything like that. They managed to fill out the runtime without feeling like they added anything wholly unnecessary. There were some moments in there that I think some people wouldn't appreciate as much, like Horton's little imagination sequences where he's doing anime fighting and whatever, but that's all funny and it doesn't take away from the story. There may be a joke here or a bit there that you don't appreciate, but it's definitely nothing to the level of Baby Grinch where you're just like, oh my god, I wish I could just fast forward this part. The dynamic also between Jim Carrey and Steve Carell is hilarious. I think both of them are at the top of their game in this movie, which is weird to say. Yes, I'm aware Horton Hears a Who is a cartoon made for kids. I get that. And it may be a slightly unpopular opinion to have it ranked so high, but ultimately, I mean, it's got a 71% on Metacritic. It's a good movie. I'm not just making that up, but people see cartoon and they know it's made for kids and they stop paying attention. But honestly, this is one of his better movies. It just is. In fact, I would actually go as far as to say that this is the only Dr. Seuss adaptation that is better than the original short that it's based on. I said it. It's an improvement. They made it better. They really did. And now we are into the top 12, which is where I will say that from here on out, these are all classics. I just undeniably, these movies are really, really good. You could argue, some may say Ace Ventura, When Nature Calls should have been in here, Fun with Dick and Jane, Me, Myself, and Irene, The Grinch. Some people will argue that those movies are classics, and some people will disagree. I think, however, you cannot argue against these next 12, or at least not to me, because I will not listen, because these next 12 are definitely classics. They're definitely great no matter what you say. So without further ado, let's get to the top 12 Jim Carrey movies, starting with number 12, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. I know I already kind of talked about Ace Ventura, Pet Detective because I talked about the sequel, and you can't really talk about that without talking about this one. But yes, Ace Ventura is hilarious. It's one of the funniest movies he ever did because he was just running at 110% at all times, and everybody else on set was just like, holy shit, what is happening? I love the part where he goes to the psych ward and he's like running in reverse, doing the instant replay, and then he does the timeout and the band parade thing and then slams his head down on the cushion. You can just see the guy playing the doctor start to laugh right before they cut. You can see throughout the whole movie people just standing and staring like, who the hell is this guy? Because it was truly the first time Jim Carrey had ever been let off the leash like this, and it was amazing. Yes, at this point, Jim Carrey had had some success on In Living Color. He was honestly the most successful thing to come out of that show, but still, people didn't really know who he was. It was like when Will Ferrell was in Elf. People knew him from SNL. They didn't know that that would translate to the movie theater, but it did with Jim Carrey in Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. Jim Carrey was an absolute shot of adrenaline to the world of comedy in the 90s. He hit the ground running at full speed and never looked back. He came out with this, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber all in the same year in 1994. It is probably the best, no, it is definitely the best year a comic actor has ever had in the history of film. Nothing can compare to those three movies in the same year. Nothing. Number 11, Yes Man. Yes Man, I think, is a little bit underrated because so many people see it and hear the concept and go, oh, that's just a liar ripoff. I understand the similarities in the concept. You've got a guy that is limited by these mystical powers or forces of nature or whatever, and is forced into making certain types of decisions. I get it, there's similarities. They're not really that similar after that. Yes, it's Jim Carrey doing slapstick humor. Yes, there's crude humor, there's sexual innuendo, all of that. There's the same type of comedy, but they're still very different. This movie, to me, is in of itself objectively hilarious. There's amazing quotable moments like the third eye blind jumper scene. I know it's blatant product placement, but the Red Bull moment defined my middle school era. I was quoting that all day, every day. Ask anybody in my family, they probably hated me. But to me, this was the last time Jim Carrey ever had a great adult comedy. And like I said, I think it is underrated because of the liar comparison, but it is objectively good on its own. There's a completely different angle here. I do think in some ways it's actually even better than Liar Liar. Obviously, you can tell that I didn't rank this higher than Liar Liar because I haven't mentioned that on the list yet, but there are still reasons that I considered it. There are reasons that I actually thought maybe this is better. One of the biggest reasons being Zooey Deschanel. She's great in this movie. I mean, the whole cast, honestly, you've got Bradley Cooper, John Michael Higgins, Rhys Darby, Terrence Stamp. There's a ton of really talented actors and comedians in this movie. There's never a dull moment in this movie. It's either outrageously funny or emotionally compelling. There's always something to like in every scene. It's just honestly one of Jim Carrey's best movies, even if, yes, it is kind of similar to Liar Liar. It is. Okay, I got it. It's still good. Number 10. A Series of Unfortunate Events. Yeah, I know, this is another unpopular opinion here, and I'm not afraid to admit it, I don't care. The Lemony Snicket series of books was fine. I think they were overrated. I think that they were a little pretentious, where Lemony Snicket was like, I'm going to make a book series that's big, bad, and dark for kids, and I'm going to be really self-serious and really pretentious about it because, you know what, there's not happy endings in real life, so why does there have to be a happy ending in mine? And yeah, there was some merit to that. I enjoyed the first few books, but it got old really fast. What the movie did to change it, which is why a lot of people don't like it, but why I love it, is that they added elements of comedy to it. With Jim Carrey, Jim Carrey is so freaking funny in this movie. And he's not the only one. There's a lot of funny characters in this movie, but Jim Carrey's Count Olaf is hilarious. But there's layers to it too, beyond just the funny. It's still dark. It's still depressing for a kid's movie. Keep that in mind. It's a kid's movie. It's also creepy and sinister at times. The scene of Count Olaf in the hallway with the glinting knife in the light will always be a great scene. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you come from. I don't care what you did, as long as you love that scene. And he is so creepy and sinister in that moment, yet he still uses the funny voice and tells a little joke in that moment, which is great. It's brilliant. This movie took all of the great moments of the book and threw out all the bad and made something even better than the books. I viewed this movie as better than the books, and certainly better than the whack Netflix series. That shit sucked. The vibe and the set design, as well as the use of green screening, it all looks so cool. It all feels so original. I love the humor of it too, using like the littlest elf thing at the beginning. Oh, it's hilarious. And then Jude Law as Lemony Snicket was a great casting. This is one of those movies that I constantly bring up as being a great movie, and very rarely do people seem to understand why. But it's a great movie. It really is.
Do you have any experience with children?
Children are strange and foreign to me. I never really was one. I know that they are an important part of the ecosystem.
Number 9. The Mask. You know, in a world that's so obsessed with comic book characters and movies with anti-heroes and wacky characters that break the fourth wall, like Deadpool, you'd really think that there would be a resurgence in fans of The Mask. I think Jim Carrey's performance is absolutely amazing and incredibly underrated because he's playing two separate characters in one, again, a lot like he did in Me, Myself, and Irene, but in my opinion, even better in this, because he plays the mild-mannered Stanley Ipkiss excellently, and then turns right around and is The Mask just as well, just as easily, just as amazingly crazy and wild, to the opposite of everything Stanley is. It's just a great performance that he pulls off so well. I think this performance gets overlooked a little bit because he did this right after Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, and people watch that and then watch The Mask and go, he's just doing kind of the same thing again. Ace Ventura and The Mask are very similar. Yeah, kind of, but not really. Also, Stanley Ipkiss is completely different than either of them, so he's able to do more of that same wacky brand of comedy, but bring in actual dramatic acting and a whole different style of comedy as well. And I think it's brilliant. I think it's expertly done. The movie as a whole, too, is good. It's not just Jim Carrey by himself here. Cameron Diaz makes her debut and is very good. Peter Green is also amazing and is able to somehow steal the show from Jim Carrey in some scenes. Frankly, you enjoy watching him just as much, if not more, than Jim Carrey in this movie, and Jim Carrey is absolutely wild and bonkers and so much fun to watch. It is a funny movie, but it's also just genuinely a good movie in every other way. They didn't write it like it was a comedy, they wrote it like a good movie that happened to be funny. Number 8. The Cable Guy. The Cable Guy was quite the controversial movie when it first came out because I don't think people were quite ready for it yet. But I think people are ready for it now, and the more I hear people talk about it now, the more I hear people call it a classic, because it is. It was a new breed of dark comedy that we'd never seen anything like before. It was deeply unsettling and bizarre and dark and twisted, but absolutely hilarious. Even since then, I've seen very few movies like it. It is a very strange movie, but it is so good and so unique. It's a comedy, but it's also a horror thriller. It's hilarious, but it's also deeply unsettling. It's so unique and so bizarre that there's not really many other movies that I can compare it to. It's just its own unique thing, and it's beautiful. And I've heard to a certain extent what it was like behind scenes. I don't know how true it is that Jim Carrey was actually the director more so than Ben Stiller, but regardless, whoever made it was a genius in their own way. From what I've heard, Jim Carrey took over this movie and made something completely different than what it was supposed to be. He made it dark and unsettling and creepy, and it's brilliant. Yet at the same time, it's hilarious. It's so bizarre. It's also got a great commentary angle to it, which is something you don't really see in comedies. And that's why I love Jim Carrey movies so much. Because yes, he is hilarious. He has some really funny movies, but he also, for the most part, seems to pick movies for a reason. The scripts that have a point to them, something that wants to be said or has at least a good plot to it. Yeah, I know he did the Ace Venturas of the world, but he usually picks a movie with a good message or something that needs to be said, whether it's like Bruce Almighty, where you've got like a message about God and faith, or you've got this, which has a warning about how we raise our kids to be obsessed with screens, which is just as applicable now as it was back then, if not more so. He's usually making movies with a message, and I really appreciate that. So this movie, as bizarre and as weird and as creepy and as unsettling as it is, it's just as funny and it's equally good. Oh, it's a classic. It's a classic. Number 7. Liar Liar. Liar Liar reunited Jim Carrey with Tom Shadyac, the director of Ace Ventura, to make a movie somehow even better than that. It's equally funny in every way to Ace Ventura, yet has a much more meaningful punch to it. The messages of this movie about love and truth and the importance of honesty and family is just so powerful that, yeah, it's cheesy at times, that ending's really cheesy, but I adore it anyway. Jim Carrey is of course great in it, but it's also got Mara Turney, it's got Jennifer Tilly and Carrie Elwes. The whole cast is just really good. And there's just something about the chemistry that Tom Shadyac and Jim Carrey had together that just pulled the best out of both of them whenever they worked together. All 3 of Tom Shadyac's best movies are starring Jim Carrey, and the 3 movies that Jim Carrey did with Tom Shadyac are 3 of his best. They're always hilarious, they're well written, well directed, they're just some really good movies. This movie also has some of the absolute best physical comedy acting as well that you'll ever see. The scene in the bathroom, oh, it's outstanding. Every time he's trying to lie against himself, the pen in my hand is royal blue. It's so fantastic. I get it. It's silly. The fantasy of it doesn't make sense. There's plot holes. There's things that he shouldn't have been able to do but could do, and there's some things that he couldn't do that I think he should have probably been able to do, but regardless, it's just entertaining and it's fun. It's a little bit brainless, but it's heartwarming and it's hilarious, and it's all you really need in a comedy. It's so good. Number 6. The Majestic. I am willing to fist fight every critic that they used their reviews for the Metacritic score that led to this movie getting a 27%. Except for you, Roger Ebert. I know you're dead anyway, but you gave it an 88, and that is good. I am fine with that. Everybody else gave it a 58% or lower, and you're all just wrong. How the hell do you watch this movie and come away with a 27%? It's outrageous. In case you don't know what The Majestic is, because it's one of the most underrated movies of all time, it was director Frank Darabont's follow-up to his 2 classic films, The Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile. It was also 2-time Golden Globe winner Jim Carrey, continuing his dramatic career, making a dramatic movie with one of the best directors of all time about a really compelling story about a screenplay writer during the communist scare era. Yet for some reason, everybody went, screw this movie. It's an Oscar bait movie. It sucks. No! It's just some really great filmmakers making a really great film. Just because it's artsy, just because it's a little bit melodramatic, doesn't mean it's Oscar bait. It's just really freaking good, you morons. Come on. It's got a great cast besides Carrey as well. It's got Martin Landau, Laurie Holden, Bob Labin, Jeffrey Demon. It's a great movie. Like I said, it's directed by Frank Darabont. He's a great director. This movie is just all around really, really good. It's extremely powerful, emotional. It really moves me every time I see it. It's one of Jim Carrey's best performances. He did this as a tribute, he said, to Jimmy Stewart, who was his favorite actor growing up, and you could tell that he was kind of channeling that, trying to do a role like Jimmy Stewart, something that Jimmy Stewart would have done in his career, and he's fantastic at it. You just wish that this movie got the recognition it deserved, because it really is near perfect. It is a fantastic movie, and the 27% boggles my mind every time I think about it. It's like, how did critics come away with that as a logical thing to say? They're wrong. They're just wrong. Number 5. Bruce Almighty. Bruce Almighty is the third and final collaboration between Jim Carrey and director Tom Shadyac, and to me, it's the best work they ever did together. It's just as funny in every way as Liar Liar and Ace Ventura, but it's even better written and even more emotionally compelling than either of them. It's also got an outstanding cast with Jim Carrey, Jennifer Aniston, Morgan Freeman, who's just amazing as God, Steve Carell, who's absolutely hilarious in his cameo. It's hilarious, it's poignant, it's a tearjerker that actually works and doesn't feel manipulative. The whole story, it could have been really cringy, it could have been really lame, but it's extremely emotionally powerful and, like I said, poignant. It has a great story with a great message delivered by amazing actors at the height of their careers. Like Jim Carrey delivers one of his best comedic performances. Morgan Freeman is, like I said, absolutely amazing as God. Jennifer Aniston is just as good as she's ever been, if not better than she's ever been before since Friends. And Steve Carell is absolutely hilarious and steals every scene he's in. It is just all around as good of a comedy as you could hope for. And the character development of Bruce, Jim Carrey's character, is outstanding, where you see him go from really not understanding much at all about God to understanding God and love and faith and how that all works. It's a powerful thing. It really is powerful. And it's also, like I said, hilarious. This movie is so freaking funny. But once again, watch the bloopers, because the bloopers might be even funnier.
News! 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 Susan?
Number 4, Man on the Moon. Jim Carrey delivered quite possibly the best acting performance of his entire lifetime in this movie. He was able to deliver such a realistic and accurate portrayal of Andy Kaufman that his family, Andy Kaufman's family, came to visit him and talk to him because they missed talking to Andy. And they talked to him because it felt like talking to him. That is wild. That is crazy. That's the best review that you could ever get, is that somebody's family came to you because you were so perfectly like the person they were related to that they believed that they were talking to them while talking to you. That is how good Jim Carrey's performance in this movie is. Biopics are never perfect. They always pick and choose things to focus on, and this movie does too. But it's incredibly well written. It's like, the acting is, like I said, it's just unbelievably good. It's funny when it needs to be. It's sad when it needs to be. It's serious when it needs to be. And it is, for the most part, accurate. Yes, they do gloss over things, but they don't go out of their way to blatantly change anything. And they involved as many people in the actual process that these events were centered around, and they had those real people be involved in the movie as much as possible. And for the most part, everybody said that it was just like the real thing. And even if it wasn't, let's just say this movie was horribly written, which it wasn't. Let's just say Milos Forman wasn't one of the best directors of all time, which he is. And let's just say that the rest of the cast wasn't good. He embodied like the spirit of Andy Kaufman to such a degree that his family thought it was him. Like, frankly, at that point, the rest of the movie doesn't have to be good. You've already succeeded. Number 3. Dumb and Dumber. As you could probably tell from this list, when I rank these things, I prioritize certain things, like good writing, or good acting, messaging, or just something that makes the movie move you and make you feel something. Like, yes, being funny is important, and I think that's a really big indicator on whether or not a comedy is good, is if it's funny. Like, that's really important. But having a message to it matters a lot. But Dumb and Dumber is just hilarious. I couldn't rank this movie any lower because, yeah, no, there's no big message to it other than, like, I don't know, don't be stupid. Like, I don't know. The movie's just about two really dumb guys, but it is one of the funniest movies ever made. It is a classic. It is the funniest movie Jim Carrey ever made, and it is one of the best comedies ever made. It's easily one of, if not the best comedy of the 90s. It is just hilarious in every way, and that's coming from a guy who doesn't normally like movies about just stupid people. That normally rubs me the wrong way. But when it comes to Dumb and Dumber, it is just so brilliantly written and acted that I don't care. The comedy isn't itself just dumb. It is really intelligent comedy. Like, it's really thought out, stupid humor. The little subtle references, the throwaway jokes here or there, like, oh look, the Monkees, they were big inspirations for the Beatles. Like, there's really subtle stuff in there, throwaway lines, not things that they make a big deal out of, that are absolutely hilarious. Also, the acting is genuinely good. I mean, Jim Carrey's hilarious, but Jeff Daniels, who isn't a comedian by trade, is amazing at playing this horribly stupid character. And so both of them and their chemistry together is absolutely amazing. You feel for them, you relate to them even though they're so stupid, and you root for them even though they're unlikable in every way, because their bromance is so strong and they're so lovably stupid in their own way. They feel genuine. Both of these characters feel real, and that's part of why it works, is they are catastrophically stupid, but it doesn't ever feel like a gimmick. It doesn't feel like they're putting it on. It feels real, and that's why it works, and that's why Dumb and Dumber 2 does not. In this one, they just embody those characters perfectly.
Hey, want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?
Number 2, The Truman Show. This is a extremely original and unique idea that is so good that it gets stuck in your head. The concept of everybody in the world watching you, like everything being scripted for you and revolving around you, is a really infectious and terrifying idea that is so unique that people have copied it a million times since, but have never been able to do as well as The Truman Show. It's a completely unique idea. It's an incredible execution of that idea with amazing acting, directing, writing, and there are a few moments of comedy that are hilarious in their moment, but they don't overshadow or override the vibe and the feel of this movie that is a very sincere, poignant, and powerful drama. I adore this movie. I think it's one of the best movies ever made. It is an amazing concept. Peter Weir, the director, did an outstanding job. It's got a great cast as well. I mean, it's not just Carrey. It's also got Ed Harris as the guy who runs the show, Laura Linney, Noah Emmerich. It's got a really good cast, but ultimately, this movie went from being a really good idea to an amazing movie because Jim Carrey's portrayal is just that good.
In case I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Yeah.
And the number 1 Jim Carrey movie of all time is, you guessed it, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Not only is it his best movie, it's my personal favorite movie of all time. It's one of the best movies ever made, and I could go on for hours as to why. The concept, which was written by Michel Gondry and Charlie Kaufman, and the movie being directed by Michel Gondry, is one of the most original, outstanding, amazing ideas ever. It's a concept that I absolutely adore and cannot get enough of. The imagery behind it is so eye-grabbing. It's amazing. I know I was saying, like, The Truman Show is unique, and it is, but this takes it all to a whole nother level. Just the idea of, like, erasing specific memories and then trying to hold on to them within your own subconscious, and then the idea that we are doomed to repeat our mistakes on and on forever. And just, it's just such a beautiful, amazing concept and movie made by two of the most talented people nobody's ever heard of, apparently. Charlie Kaufman and Michel Gondry, nobody knows who they are, but they're quietly making some of the best movies year in, year out. And as with all of the best of these movies, it's not just Jim Carrey. The entire cast is amazing. I mean, you've got Jim Carrey, you've got Kate Winslet, you've got Tom Wilkinson, Mark Ruffalo, Elijah Wood, Kirsten Dunst. It is just an amazing ensemble with amazing, unique, powerful writing and imagery and acting and directing. It is a really fantastic movie that is absolutely amazing in every way. Unique, powerful, emotional, compelling, doesn't rely on any cheap corner cuts or jokes or silly faces. It's just a gut punch, scene after scene that will never leave your mind. Is one of the most memorable movies ever to be made, ever. It's easily in the top 100 movies ever made. If I ever need to prove to somebody that Jim Carrey is a good actor, which I've had to do a couple times, I show them this movie, and I've never had anybody watch this movie and say, yeah, no, he's a one-trick pony. I've never had anybody be able to watch this movie and not admit that it's great. I've never had anybody be able to say anything negative about Jim Carrey after seeing this movie, because this is... It's perfect. It's a perfect movie. It's flawless, and Jim Carrey is absolutely amazing in it. If I had to pick one movie, just one, to watch for the rest of my life, it would be this one. That's not a joke. That's not an exaggeration. I would literally pick this movie to watch for the rest of my life. It is beautiful. It's sweet. It's sad. It's sincere. It's everything I want in a movie. So there you have it. That is every Jim Carrey movie ranked from worst to best. at least in my opinion, of course. So what's your ranking? How would you rank his movies in order? What's your favorite? What's your least favorite? Which movies have you not seen and need to see? Let me know that as well. Which movie do you regret him not making the most? Because there are plenty of movies that he almost made. Like, he was supposed to be in Meet the Parents. He was supposed to play Buzz Lightyear in Toy Story. He was going to be in Night at the Museum. He was going to play Jack Sparrow. There are so many things he missed out on. For me, the biggest regret is that he never worked with Nolan. He originally was going to work on a Howard Hughes biopic with Nolan before eventually Scorsese and Leo DiCaprio made that film. That will always be the biggest regret I'll ever have, is my favorite actor and my favorite director were going to make a great movie together and never did. So what movie do you wish got made that he never did? Thank you for liking, sharing, and commenting. Bye.